This lecture is going to cover the last section in our modernism section. Last time we finished talking about the photographs. Now we're going to start with regionalism. Regionalism was an American art movement, and within it we saw, again, they were still trying to make things new, but we see a movement away from the abstraction. We see a return to naturalism and realism within the works. We can see that clearly in the work here. This is Edward Hopper's. Edward Hopper, 1882 to 1967. And this painting is the Nighthawks, 1942. It's an oil on canvas. And what Hopper was trying to do in his works is he believed a nation's art is greatest when it most reflects the character of its people. And that's what he tried to do within his works. He wanted to record the American scene. Most of his works focus on the middle class and ordinary things and settings, yet there's a sense of loneliness and even isolation in many of the works. And you can see that here in Nighthawks. What this is supposed to represent is city life, but after hours. So we see these three individuals sitting at a counter at a diner, and then we see one lone worker. And even though there are these four people together, no one's really talking to each other, especially if you look at the couple, right? They're not even looking at each other. And so within this, you kind of see this idea of isolation and regret. And you can see that in these two works also by Hopper. The one on the left is Office at Night, 1940, oil on canvas. And so here we just have a man and a woman at work. She's probably the secretary. He's working, and they're in this room together, but there's no interaction between them. They're not even talking or even looking at each other. If you look at the woman, again, she seems to just kind of be staring off into space. And then the other work is Office in a Small City, 1957, oil on canvas. And again, with this one, right, we see the man, he's at work, but again, there's that sense of isolation, the sense of loneliness in the work. All right, another regional artist is Thomas Hart Benton, 1889 to 1975. Now, he was working for the Works Progress Administration, one of the New Deal programs. And what happens with this is to give artists jobs, the government would pay them to go out and paint murals in some of the government buildings, such as post office and the one you see here. These are Benton's murals for the Missouri State Capitol, and what he recorded on them, it's the history of Missouri. And here I'm showing you a different image. This shows you the entire room, so you can see how large this mural was. Within this, again, different images from the social history of Missouri. It includes, when we look back on this one, you can see this domestic scene. There's an old woman rolling out dough. An older man is reading, and then there's a young boy sitting there drinking a glass of milk. In other parts of the mural, there are different farming scenes. And then we even see a lawyer arguing a case at one point. And then the final regionalist that we're going to look up is Jacob Lawrence. This is his date's 1917 to 2000, and he was an African-American artist. And what he was doing was he was depicting the plight of African Americans as they moved from the South to the North after World War I. In fact, from 1916 to 1923, the African American population in most major northern cities doubled because there was this idea that we still had segregation, official segregation going on in the South. And so there was this idea that by moving to the North, right, things would be better. His works were supported by the WPA, and this painting was created as part of a series. The series is called The Migration of the Negro, and it was painted from 1939 to 1941. Well, what we see here, this one is called They Also Found Discrimination, 1940 to 41, and it's tempera on wood. And so what quickly happened, the African Americans quickly found that life in the North soon became like life in the South, that they encountered discrimination, racism, and poor housing. And you can see that shown here. Here we have a group of different individuals in a restaurant eating, and we can clearly see there's the separation between the two. And then the two white men that are shown have faces. And if you look, the four African American characters in here, they have no faces. And Lawrence did this on purpose because he was trying to show the plight, again, of the African American, and that basically they became nothing but their color. So they don't have any individual identity. All right, well, this moves us into chapter 23 with the mid-20th century and later. And so what happens in World War II, 1939 to 1945, we have the use of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, 1945. And with this, humankind can see and that they are now capable of complete and total self-destruction. After World War II, we have the Cold War. You have these fears of nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. And we also have, the world is trying to recover from World War II. And your book talks about the Marshall Plan. As we go on, we have the Vietnam War. And one of the main ideas I want you to get from this time period is this idea of existentialism that develops. And existentialism believes that it's an individual's responsibility to make good choices, and that doing what's right is not necessarily what's right for you, that human beings have a duty to one another, and that we must realize that the choices we make affect others. All right, well, the first art style that we're going to look at in this time is abstract expressionism. Please note, abstract expressionism and expressionism are two distinctly different movements. Abstract expressionism began about 1945 to about 1960, and it began in New York. At this point, New York had become if not the artistic center of the world. And right after World War II, there was a time in this idea of actually optimism for the future. We have people returning from the war. This is the time of the baby boom. The generation we call the baby boomers are born at this time period. Because of different GI bills, a lot of families are buying homes, buying cars, owning televisions. And so within this brief period, it's almost a sense of optimism. And abstract expressionism reflects this. It was a pretty short-lived movement because by the 1960s, the arms race was in full force, and we have the rise of the nuclear age, and abstract expressionism pretty much faded out. Now, abstract expressionism has very varied art forms. It varies from artist to artist, but there are two main characteristics that remain constant. The first is freedom from traditional use of brushwork, and the second is exclusion of representational subject matter. The goal of abstract expressionism is to show the expressive capabilities through individual gestures and style. The image I have here is orange and yellow, and it's by Mark Rothko, who we'll talk about in a moment. But probably the most famous of the abstract expressionist painters is Jackson Pollock, 1912 to 1956. And this is his Autumn Rhythm number 30, 1950. Painted in 1950, and it's an oil on canvas. And in a sense, Pollock was influenced by the surrealism notion of automation. And what he wanted is that he would just paint. He wouldn't really think about what he was painting. And he actually says, when I am in my painting, I'm not aware of what I am doing. The painting has a life of its own. I try to let it come through. It's only when I lose contact with the painting that the result is a mess. Otherwise, there is pure harmony, an easy give and take, and the painting comes out well. And his style of painting is what we call action painting or drip painting. And what he would do is he actually would take his canvases off the easel and put them on the floor. And he would almost dance around them. And what he would do is sometimes he would use a brush, but he would take this brush, dip it in the paint, and then just kind of drip the paint from the brush onto the canvas. Sometimes he used sticks. Sometimes he just poured the paint right onto the canvas. And what he would claim is that he actually became a part of the painting himself. Well, a man named Hans Nemeth created a series of photographs and two short films of Pollock working. One's in black and white, and the other is in color from underneath the canvas as he's working. And I've given you the two different YouTube clips here, so you actually can watch that and see Pollock painting. In the one, you'll even hear Pollock talking about his own process. Namath said of Pollock, he said, Pollock's method of painting suggested a moving picture, the dance around the canvas, the continuous movement, the drama. And again, please watch both of these clips. Pollock died pretty young. He died at the age of 44. He was an alcoholic, and he died in an alcohol-related single car accident. He was the driver. Now, the next artist we're going to look at is Lee Krasner. Her dates are 1908 to 1984, and she actually worked with Pollock. When they first met, she was actually better known in New York, and she provided him access to the art world. They married in 1945, and his fame soon came to eclipse hers. Some scholars claim that was because she was so busy taking care of him. But she continued painting even after his death. And again, with hers, you can see this physical energy seen in the paintings. And this is Flowering Limb, 1963, oil on canvas. Here we see more control than Pollock's, and what she would do is she would use the brush within hers. So it almost looks like the drip painting, but not quite as varied and uncontrolled as Pollock's were. All right, next we have William de Kooning. He was born in Holland, 1904 to 1997, but he immigrated to the United States in 1926. Within his works, you can see these broad slashing strokes. And this is Excavation, 1950, and it's an oil on canvas. Now, within here, you can see some identifiable forms, but they don't really go together. Your book makes references to that there's different sets of teeth and eyes in here, and then it's mixed with these geometric forms. His goal is he wanted an afocal surface, meaning where the eye can never quite come to rest, that you're constantly moving around. And he believed this disorientation represented the modern condition. And he liked the instability of his art. He said, I do not think of art as a situation of comfort. All right, next we're going to look at Mark Rothko, 1903 to 1970. He was born in Russia but did move to the United States, and he is known for his large color field paintings. In his works, there is the complete absence of recognizable figurative subjects, and they are flat, two-dimensional planes of color. And you can see that here in red, brown, and black, 1958 oil on canvas. And again, his works are usually very large. This is 8 feet 1 inch by 9 feet 9 inches. And what Rothko was doing is he believed the color itself, right, represented the emotions. And he wanted to show his own anguish within the work. He said of his works that, again, he wanted to show his own anguish. And Rothko stated, I am interested only in expressing the basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, doom, and so on. And the fact that lots of people break down and cry when confronted with my pictures shows that I communicate with those basic human emotions. The people who weep before my pictures are having the same religious experience I had when I painted them. And within his works, when you look at them, they just seem to be these plain color fields, something that maybe is simple to do. They're actually very hard to do. And he's right. Many people do have emotional responses to them. Personally, when I saw them, especially in textbooks, I didn't really get it. But if you ever have the opportunity to see one in person, take that opportunity, because there is something different about seeing it face to face. The next image should look very familiar to you because this is the cover of your textbook. But this is Lois Mailou Jones, 1904 to 1998. And she was an African-American woman born in Boston, and she had many talents. She was a painter. She actually designed textiles. She was a teacher. She taught at Howard University for, I think, over 30 years, and she was an ambassador. And what she would do within her artwork is she would use motifs from African tribal art and the strong color patterns of Haitian art. Her husband, I believe, was Haitian. Here she used simple forms, bright colors, and various textures pasted onto the canvas. So that's why this one, Ode to Kinshasa, 1972, is mixed media on canvas, because she would paint certain fields, but then she would also take different fabrics, different textiles, and put them on the canvas themselves. Next, your book talks about some architecture. This you can just kind of classify it as modernist architecture. It doesn't have a specific style to it. Your book discussed Ludwig Miles van der Rohe, 1887 to 1969. He taught at the Bauhaus that we already talked about, and then he fled to Chicago to avoid Nazi persecution. And he is given credit for creating the modern skyscraper. And his idea is less is more. And then you would see the simple steel frame construction, glass windows, and no ornamentation. Now this image, this is Le Corbusier, who we've talked about earlier, and this is the Notre Dame de Haute. It's in Rauschenberg, France, and here it's interesting because you see this kind of freedom of form. It looks almost as if the church is almost molded out of clay, but in fact it's made with masonry and then sprayed concrete. And this is a church on top of a mountaintop. And so you actually see the church itself. It looks almost like a mountain itself. The windows are all different sizes and shapes. And they're very deep. You can see how thick the wall is that they are in. And with this, it's more modern because, again, playing around with some of that design, you see the abstract design. Right, next we're going to look at Alexander Calder, 1898 to 1976, again an American artist, and he is most well known for his mobiles, right? Mobiles, think of, you probably think of them above a baby's crib, right? Well, these are sculptural forms that are suspended from the ceiling, and they're driven by the air itself, so it means they're constantly moving. Because of this constant movement, the form itself is always changing. And so the artist must think about using color, shape, composition, motion, time, and space all together. The image you see here is Red Gongs, 1950, painted aluminum, brass, steel, rod, and wire. But I gave you a link here, and this is a YouTube link, and this shows Calder's red, blue, and black cascade, and so you can actually see the mobile in motion. Calder was also well known for his very large sculptures that are meant to interrupt space, such as this one. This is Eagle, 1971, and it's painted steel. And this one, it's 38 feet 9 inches by 32 feet 6 inches by 32 feet 6 inches. And this is in Olympic Sculptural Park in Seattle, Washington. All right, the next sculpture that we're going to look at, this is Isamu Noguchi, 1904 to 1988. He was a Japanese American, and what he tried to do in his work is he just tried to discover in stone the idea of the wabi. If you've heard of wabi-sabi, it's the wabi. And wabi is a Japanese concept, and it's the ultimate naturalness of an object. Your book claims this work is related to the Surrealists, but it's not. He's actually more of an abstraction artist. Why? Because he tried to represent in his works just what you needed enough to understand. And you can see it in this work, Kouros, 1944 to 45, Georgian marble. And this is 9 feet 9 inches tall. And Kouros is actually the Greek term for boy or young man. And so that's what you see here. He's tried to extract from this idea of a man or young boy only those elements necessary for you to understand what it is. Well, in the 1950s and the 1960s, we're going to see a rise in the consumer culture, right? Americans, people around the world are buying more things. More things are being produced, mass produced. In the 1960s, I believe, we have the first shopping mall is born. And so this is a place designed just for people to go and buy things, to consume. Well, artists look toward the cycle of production, consumption, and waste that define consumer culture and that helped inspire some of their artwork, such as you see here. This is Robert Rauschenberg's, and 1925 to 2008. He's American. And what you see here, this is what he would call assemblages. So he would take other things and he would put them together. It's almost like a collage, but in sculpture format. And so what he would do is he would take things that would normally be discarded and he would combine them together to make art. And you see that in this. This is Odalisk, 1955 to 1958. stuffed rooster, a pillow, magazine illustrations, paint, all on wood. The name itself is actually a little tongue-in-cheek because the title refers to the Odalisk, right, which means a harem girl, and then obelisk, four-sided stone pillar capped by a small pyramid, which was very significant in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Well, here he has created this obelisk, if you will, out of the waste, out of consumer products. The images that are on the side of the wooden box are not laid out neatly, they're disordered. And that's to bring the idea of daily life to art, that life itself is messy, disordered, and unpredictable and multi-layered. And so he is taking the objects, right, the waste of this consumer culture, and then he's creating something with them. You also see that in the work of Louise Nevelson, 1899 to 1988. Born in Russia, however, she moved to Maine as a child. Hers are also type of assemblage, but what she would do is she would use small wooden objects, scraps, and remnants that she would find in furniture shops. And she would take these and she would glue and nail them together inside of wooden crates, and then she would stack these boxes together. Then the entire work is painted one solid color so that it unifies it. So when you look at this one, this is Sky Cathedral, 1958, assemblage, it's wood painted black. And so with it painted all one solid color, it looks like one unified artwork. But look at all of the details and different elements in here. Each one of these is something very, very different, right, and on its own. However, she combines them into one creative work. Next, we're going to move to the pop art movement. This is in the 1950s and the 1960s. The leaders of this movement were Andy Warhol, Claes Oldenburg, and Roy Lichtenstein. And here, these works were a commentary on American consumerism. Pop art tried to represent life as Americans lived it and shows that American culture played a powerful role in these emotional lives. One goal of the pop artist was to transform the everyday into the monumental. And then artists also turned away from traditional painting and used more current tools where images were made by machines. And you're going to see that in works such as this one here. This is by Andy Warhol, probably the most well-known of the pop artists, 1928 to 1987. And he used the objects of popular culture and recreated them, such as you see here. That this is the Vegetarian Vegetable from Campbell Soup N, 1969, and it's a screen print. So a screen print is a process where this is printed onto a canvas. When you think about your t-shirts, your printed t-shirts, that's a type of screen printing. And what the pop artists were also doing is they're trying to challenge how we look at art. Because there was this idea that art had to be expensive, right? That could only be one thing. Well, the pop artists say, no, that's not true. Just because we can mass produce something doesn't take its value away from it. And that's what they're doing here. And you can also see it in this one. This is the original Campbell Soup cans by Andy Warhol, 1962. And this is some synthetic polymer paint on canvas. Now, there's 32 different canvases. Why? Campbell Soup's slogan was 32 different varieties of Campbell Soup. And what Warhol's doing here, right, they look almost exactly the same. The only thing different is the title of the soup. And he's making a comment here, right, with this American consumer culture. Do we really need 32 different types of soup? And we don't, right? And that's what he's commenting on. Also, another pop artist is Roy Lichtenstein, 1923 to 1997. And what he would do in his works is he would make representations from comic strips. And the popular comic strips of the day, he would focus on war comics and romantic comics. And then these would be painted or printed with what's called the Ben-Day dot. This printing process is what was used in newspapers. Why? Because it was cheaper, because you didn't have to use as much ink. Because think about newspapers in the 60s, right? Newspapers are meant to be consumed daily. So they need to be cheap and they need to be easily disposed of. And so he is taking those materials in that process and creating these canvases. Usually his works are very large. This one, Drowning Girl of 1963, is oil and synthetic polymer paint on canvas. And it's 5 feet 7 5/8 inches by 5 feet 6 3/4 inches. And you can see here, he's again reflecting on consumer culture and using the materials of the culture itself. All right, the next artist is Claus Oldenburg. He was born in 1929 and he's still alive. And what he tried to do, your textbook shows one of his other sculptures, hamburgers, but I don't think you really get the feel of it, because what he would do is he would take normal everyday objects and items, things that can be used or consumed, and he would recreate them in this giant form and in a way that it could not be used. And that's what you get here. This is actually dropped cone, and it's in Cologne, Germany. It was installed in 2001. It's made of stainless and galvanized steels, fiber reinforced plastic, balsa wood, and then painted with a polyester gel coat. And so what you see here, this is literally an ice cream cone that's been dropped on top of a building. It's 39 feet 10 inches tall, and its a height above the building is 32 feet. So it's 32 feet up in the air, then it's another 39 feet. And so what he's doing, again, he's making consumable goods. An ice cream cone is something we would usually eat, yet it's made it in a way that can't be consumed. What he himself said about his art is, I try to make the art look like it's part of the world around it. At the same time, I take great pains to show that it doesn't function as part of the world around it. All right, next is Marisol Escobar, 1930 to 2016. She was an American artist. She was born in Paris, but her parents were Venezuelan. Then they moved to Los Angeles, moved back to Paris, and then she lived in Manhattan. And here, what she's doing in her works is she's humorously satirizing social and political aspects of life. So here we see women and dog, 1969, plaster, synthetic polymer, wood, taxidermy dog head, and miscellaneous items. And so you have these 3 women, right? They're all unified by the orange color and then the print that's repeated in the skirt and the shirt. You see that, and then the one girl, and then the dog. And these are almost, I think we would call them, ladies at lunch. They don't really work. They go out, they have lunch, and they shop, okay? So with this, again, making a comment on consumer culture. Well, the next style we're going to look at is minimalism. This developed in the late 1950s and 1960s, and minimalists sought to reduce the complexity of both design and content as far as possible. They believed the simplest and the fewest elements used, the better. That's non-sensual, impersonal, geometric shapes and forms, and address space and how the viewer relates to them spatially. There is no message from the artist to the viewer. Minimalists said, basically don't try to put meaning on this. What you see is what you get. The goal was to leave the response and meaning up to the viewer and to really not push any meaning onto the work itself. Here you can see this is by LeWitt, 1928 to 2007. And what he's done here, this is open modular cube. And so it's created in 1966, and it's painted aluminum. It's 5 feet by 5 feet by 5 feet. And here you see a simple cube basically made up of other cubes. Interestingly enough, the use of light changes its appearance because of the different shadows. And so what's interesting is what appears at first stable is constantly in flux. LeWitt later in his works would become completely conceptual, meaning he wouldn't actually create the work. He would tell you, right, give directions for work, but would never create them. So the work actually only exists in concept only. All right, next we're going to look at what's called op art or optical art, and this is by Bridget Riley, born 1931. Op art, again, seeks to be intellectual, not emotional. Usually you see meticulously patterns that are precisely painted. Usually these are made with brilliant contrasting colors or black and white. And so in this work, which is Hesitate from 1964, which is an emulsion on board, with this, it's black, gray, and white painting, yet with how the dots are placed, it gives this illusion of three-dimensionality and movement to the work. yet the work itself is a completely flat surface. Riley was interested in polarities such as the static and the active, the fast and the slow. And what these works are supposed to show is the repetition, contrast, calculated reversal, and counterpoint that it's also parallel to the basis of our emotional structure. All right, and then this is the last one that we're going to look at. Again, this is looking at architecture. This is by Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano, and this is the Pompidou Center in Paris, 1971 to 77. This is a modernist work because what they tried to do here is basically they took a building and they turned it inside out. So all those mechanical parts that are usually hidden, in this work they're made oversized and they're put on the outside of the building and then painted according to their functions in very bright colors. So red is vertical transportation, meaning elevators. Green is water. Yellow is electricity, white ventilation, and blue air conditioning. And here you can see another angle of the building where you see all this. And so what happens is they take these things that are usually hidden away and they make them the focal point of the building. Along the side, you see the tube-like structure. That's actually the escalator. Think about this. Escalators are usually in the center of the building. Well, here they have it in this tube on the outside of the building. This building in Paris actually houses the Public Information Library, which is a vast public library, the Museum of National Modern Art, which is the largest museum for modern art in Europe, and it has a Center for Music and Acoustic Research. And it's named after Georges Pompidou, the president of France from 1969 to 1974, who commissioned the building. It was officially opened on January 1st, 1977 by President Deschamps. And then as of 2006, the Pompidou Center has had over 180 million visitors since 1977. And it had almost a little bit more than 5 million visitors just in 2013. So again, here you see this idea, this modernist idea of making it new. So taking a traditional idea of a building and literally turning it inside out. That completes our lecture on modernism. Next time we'll start discussing postmodernism.